Today, we're back for another instalment in my More Than a Mistress series, where we explore the lives of women from history who are best known for being mistresses. This series aims to give them the recognition they deserve as multifaceted and complex human beings who really are far more than mistresses. In today's episode, we'll be looking at Mary Shelton. She was a cousin of Anne Boleyn and is best known for being a potential mistress of Henry VIII. But what more do we know about her? It's not known for sure when Mary was born. She may have been born sometime around 1510 to 1515, but it's also been suggested that she was born in about 1520. The earlier date range is more generally accepted though. Mary's father was Sir Thomas Shelton, who would later be a commander of Princess Elizabeth's guard, and her mother was Anne, the sister of Thomas Boleyn. And yes, that is the Thomas Boleyn, who was Anne Boleyn's father, so Mary Shelton and Anne Boleyn were first cousins. Mary came from a large family and had many siblings, and some of their names are really quite interesting, so I'll just recite them now. So we have John, Anne, Ralph, Gabriella, which I think is fantastic, Elizabeth, Margaret, Thomas, and Emma. Mary's childhood home was likely Shelton Hall in Norfolk. Mary became a maid of honour in Anne Boleyn's household in 1533, and it's in this position that she most likely met Henry VIII. It has been suggested that during one of her pregnancies, Anne Boleyn thrust Mary in the way of the king to serve as a mistress who would not threaten her position as the queen. Though this narrative is often perpetuated, Henry may have pursued Mary himself, and I think this is probably likelier when it's considered that Anne was said to declare that, quote, "Whenever she hears of his, Henry VIII, loving another woman but her, she is broken-hearted." It is generally accepted that Mary was Henry's mistress, although some historians have suggested that it was in fact Mary's sister, Margaret, or Madge for short. Recent scholarship now suggests that Mary is the far likelier candidate, with confusion arising from the early modern shaping of the letter Y. The shaping of this letter could make Mary look like Marg, an abbreviation for Margaret. And unfortunately, confusion between the sisters is enduring, although some historians argue Mary's sister Madge was engaged to Henry Norris at this point. Others state that it was in fact Mary who was betrothed to him. Whatever the case, Imperial Ambassador Eustace Chapuis recorded that the involvement between the king and Mistress Shelton began in February 1535, lasting until around August that year. And it does seem that a lasting impression was made. Several years later, after the death of Jane Seymour, it was well recorded that Henry was much taken with a portrait of the beautiful 16-year-old Christina of Milan. Christina was described as of very high stature, a goodly personage of body and competent beauty, of favour excellent, soft of speech, and very gentle in countenance. She resembleth much one Mistress Shelton that sometime waited on Queen Anne. I think it very likely that the Mistress Shelton referenced here is indeed Mary. Mary was highly intelligent and very creative too. During her time at court, she enjoyed composing and consuming literature. Along with Mary Howard/Fitzroy and Margaret Douglas, she compiled poems in the Devonshire manuscript, a collection of literary work associated with members of Anne Boleyn's circle at the court of Henry VIII. Contributors also included Thomas Wyatt and Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey. Mary probably came into possession of the manuscript in 1536, when Margaret Douglas was confined to the Tower after a love affair with Thomas Howard, and again in 1539. During these periods, it's thought that Mary added extensively to the work. Kelly Hart states that Mary was, quote, "by far the most industrious writer in the book, and seems also to have played the role of editor." Hart also comments that Mary's writing shows an articulate and forthright woman defending her gender. It seems that Mary's poetry may have got her into some degree of trouble though, particularly with Anne Boleyn. An anecdote told by William Latimer states that, quote, "a book of prayers which belonged to one of her, Anne Boleyn's, maids of honour called Mistress Mary Shelton, was presented unto her highness, wherein were written certain idle poems, or posies. The Queen her Majesty, calling her before her presence, wonderfully rebuked her that would permit such wanton toys in her book of prayers, and upon this occasion commanded the mother of the maidens to have a more vigilant eye to her charge." If this is to be believed, it seems that there was some degree of tension between the cousins. It is interesting to speculate on what their relationship may have been like. Mary's love of literature may have sparked a romantic involvement with another poet called John Clear, and possibly Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey. The Devonshire manuscript suggests Thomas Wyatt's admiration too. Included there is a poem, and the first letter of each stanza spells Shelton. Wyatt had written a similar poem for Anna, likely Anne Boleyn, though some scholars believe Mary to have authored the former poem herself. After the downfall of Anne Boleyn, Mary may have retired to Kenninghall in Norfolk for some time, the home of her friend Mary Fitzroy. The death of our Mary's father in 1539 brought on some financial problems too. By the early 1540s, matters had improved and Mary had become engaged to John Clear. This was probably a love match. This does make it all the more tragic though that John died in 1545 before the pair could be wed. He did leave land to Mary in his will though, surely signifying his affection for his betrothed, and Mary is actually recorded as an executor of his will. It seems she played an active role in settling the legalities of his estate. This clear pragmatism may also be reflected in the fact that Mary married for the first time soon after John's death, in 1546, to a cousin named Sir Anthony Heveningham. The couple had several children together before Anthony's death in about 1557, and through their son, Arthur, Mary is thought to be an ancestor of Diana, Princess of Wales. Mary soon married again in around 1557-8 to the brilliantly named Philip Appleyard. Not much is known about Mary's later life, and the precise date of Mary's death is also unknown. Though Remley has suggested a date of 1560, sometime around 1570 seems much likelier, as records suggest that she was buried at Heveningham Church in Suffolk in 1571. Mary lived through the reigns of several Tudor monarchs, Henry VIII, Edward VI, Mary I, and she even lived to see the accession of Elizabeth I. Interestingly, Elizabeth actually welcomed Mary's daughter Abigail into her household, and as such the royal connections continued. Henry VIII was just a very small part of an incredibly full and interesting life. And although John Hussey did mention Mary as a potential wife for Henry after the death of Jane Seymour, of course this wasn't to be. I imagine Mary may have been fairly relieved to escape this fate, but who knows? I hope that Mary was able to enjoy peace and fulfilment in her later years with lots and lots of poems. Thank you so much for watching, and please do subscribe if you enjoyed. I've got lots more history videos on the way.